Hi, my name is Ilya Zlotnik, advisor and partner with Volatile Capital Management, and welcome to today's conversation with Lance Breitstein. Lance is an elite trader, formerly with Trillium, a top trading company with offices in Chicago, New York, and Miami. Lance went on to have multiple P&L records over his 10-year career at Trillium, had multiple 8-figure trading years, and led many other traders and mentored other traders to have successful careers in their own right. Lance left a few years ago to pursue several business ventures and doing some great work in the philanthropy space. He continues to trade when the opportunity strikes, like a couple weeks ago with the meme stock craze.
Indeed.
And he continues to influence the broader trader community through public speaking engagements, social influencing, and in the process of building a great business that does trading education and all that. So Lance, welcome to today's conversation.
Thank you, Ilya, and thank you for the years of friendship and advisorship.
Absolutely. Well, it's good to have you here. I suspect we'll have a fun conversation. You and I have developed a good friendship over the years. We have a lot in common. Our interests in health and wellness, exercise, good food, and adventure. So we'll talk about your journey that led you into trading, what got you to a level where you were competing at from an elite perspective for many years, and you continue to, and what interestingly led you to leave trading at least full time at such a young age. And one thing that I really want to dig into, what we had talked about earlier, is the psychological component that you took so seriously and how that allowed you to compete at that elite level for so many years, really in a space that's ultra competitive. Not a lot of people make it. Very few people are as successful as you. It's very stressful 24/7, all that stuff. So let's start with, what initially led you to wanting to pursue a career in trading?
Sure. I think I was always interested in the markets and knew a little bit about the stock market just growing up. My parents didn't do anything in that field. But then come college, once I read one little book on the stock market, I quickly became obsessed with it. And that's when I started to read this series of books called The Market Wizards. And it's just interviews with top traders. And it was so cool seeing the many different strategies to beat the market. And as I learned about a lot of this, it was really good to just see the different ways of beating the market. And I wanted to see if I was up to the challenge.
Got it. So at what age did you start really reading those books and having an interest in the space?
So it was probably between 19 and 20. Okay. And then from there, I just wanted to obsessively learn about the market and consumed everything.
I always find it so interesting where, you talk to people that end up having great careers and they glob on to certain areas of different aspects of their lives, but you started at a pretty young age and you pursued that passion. When did you actually place your first trade?
That's a good question. I think the first time from a trading perspective was probably around my sophomore year in college. And that was also around 2008 when the whole crisis was going on. Mm-hmm. So I remember you would see all the crazy headlines about the banks, and I wasn't really so methodical. It's not as if I was some savant doing crazy strategies in college versus just shooting from the hip and seeing what happened. And then you win some, you lose some, and trying to figure out what actually makes sense.
Absolutely. Did you make money on that first trade?
I think I initially made money, then I ended up losing it.
Okay.
Which is probably a good lesson to get early on.
It's probably a common theme. I know they say it's probably better to face defeat early on, right? So you work harder.
Yeah, the worst thing that could happen is you get initial success and you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know this was so easy. Then you get fooled by the randomness and you inevitably get ruined in the long run.
Absolutely. Okay, so you started trading in college, and then how did you really pursue that first job out of college at Trillium?
Yep. So for me, a lot of the ethos of the trading field interested me far more than the sales and trading side, the investment banking side. I don't really love bureaucracy. I don't really love getting dressed up. And I really wanted something that was entrepreneurial and meritocratic, where it's like, if I can perform and outperform versus the masses, I want to be compensated for it. I want the freedom associated with this job. And once I learned about the prop trading side, which is essentially there's firms where they provide you education, capital, and stuff like that, it seemed like, wow, this really embodies everything that I'm looking for to try to take on the challenge of beating the market.
Okay. So how did that start? Talk about how you got the job and then kind of maybe the first couple months or first year of that experience. Because I know at first it was very difficult for you.
Yeah, for a very long time, it was very difficult. And I'm sure a lot of your clients are interested in trading and everything. And I think it's so important to just really relay how ridiculously long and difficult that learning curve is, where I would even say it takes 6 months of full-time work with mentorship and with proper resources to even have a clue what you're doing. Mm-hmm. That's when you can first start to realize what tickers should I even be looking at. And a lot of that job was really kind of just drinking from a fire hose, where it was so much trying to learn at once. And as much as you learn stuff in school, nothing at all applied. It was so much just on the job focus. What makes these patterns capturable? Where can you actually capture money from the market? And it's really so specific, the different spots. And despite there being thousands of stocks out there, you really need to learn how to hone in to maybe the dozen of stocks that are moving in a certain way each day.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's so interesting that the way you talk about it takes at least 5 to 6 months of full-time work and having mentorship and having financial capital to even get an inkling of sort of knowing what to do. Whereas you see the broader masses thinking they know how to trade.
It's all randomness. Anybody that has found success in a short amount of time, a lot of that just tends to be pure fooled by randomness, where some people will get lucky over a time frame, some won't. And what's so funny is you see people, especially from my seat now, where they think they've come up and they've accomplished something in the field, and they're 2, 3, 4 years in, and it's at that point you might be achieving some level of profitability, but for true mastery, I don't think you can even approach that anywhere before at least probably 7+ years. And if one can ever attain mastery, I think you can come close, but it's a very difficult job.
Yeah. I mean, I suspect you could probably say that about most, professions, where it takes that 7 to 10 years, or what do they say, to 10,000 hours or whatever it is to become a master in that specific craft. Okay. So the first year was difficult. Maybe talk a little bit more about, now you had a mentor. There was a point in time where you were almost thinking of quitting. So talk about those moments and what the turning point was that got you to the next level.
Sure. Yeah, it was an incredibly frustrating journey. Like, I don't think most people can grasp what it's like to succeed at most things you do in life. And then when you take on this job, by the nature of everyone even being in that seat, you think you're going to succeed. If you didn't think so, you wouldn't be there. Yeah. And these are all high performers. These are all smart people. The baseline to just get in the door is that you've not failed much in your life. And what happens then is you see, just psychologically, it's so interesting because you see people fail at different points. And what is that tapping point? It's almost like a Navy SEAL Hell Week, where it's like you have really good contenders, but who's going to ring the bell and drop out? And I was pretty much towards the back of my class. I saw no success whatsoever in the first year. I don't even think I had a profitable month in the first year. And what was interesting, though, is my ranking within the class started to go up over time. Not because I was making money, but because other people were dropping out and ringing the bell.
Okay.
And
interesting.
Yeah. And so everyone has their own opportunity cost. My brother was doing investment banking at the time. So you see your brother in the city making some real money, having fun despite the long hours, and you're making next to nothing. Even back then, I think the salary I was getting was $500 a week. And so initially, some people think they get it, but really it's so rare. But the more people that quit, the more I said, this is the job I want to be doing, and I love it. And really, they're going to have to probably kick me out of here, kicking and screaming. And so I eventually, close to the 1.5 year mark, started to interview for new jobs because I was reaching the point where, okay, like maybe at what point do you have that internal dialogue where you question your own ability? And when you try so hard and put so much effort in, but you just can't see the change. And we both love the book Atomic Habits, and so much is you're making progress, but a lot of times you just can't see it because as James Clear in that book makes out of an analogy, the water it's not yet at the boiling point, but all that energy is going in and the temperature is rising. Even though you can't see anything on the surface, you're getting closer and closer. And so I was interviewing at firms, and crazily enough, if I had gotten probably any of those jobs, I don't think I would have had any choice but to leave, because your opportunity cost, you're not living a glamorous life, you're working your butt off and seeing none of the results. And I started to have a conversation with the number 2 guy in the group, and he's like, look, man, I really think you're starting to get this stuff. I can tell from the way you speak about it. I can tell from the different stocks and the setups that you're calling out. You understand this. And if you don't give it a little bit more time, I think you'll really just end up regretting it. And I gave it that little bit more time. And there was one standout trade where I think I ended up making 10 grand in this trade, which was a multiple magnitude outlier versus what I had otherwise been making. And that covers a lot of rent. And once I did that, that was that glimmer of hope where it's like, wait a second. If I did this, I saw my boss make probably 10, 20x what I made in that trade. And it's like, wait a second. If I did that and my boss made 10, 20x what I made, one day, if I just get to that level, I can do that too. And so that gave me that bridge to just last the 6 more months where things started to really click. And then from there, it's never smooth sailing. You always take major setbacks. You always have major periods of doubt. But that's when I at least started to get some P&L under me.
Yeah. One thing that stands out about your story that we had talked about multiple times is in the beginning, when you got the job, you had the option of going to the main office in Manhattan, where it would be a lot of fun. You're in the center of the world, effectively. You can trade, then you go out and have a good time. But instead, you chose to go to this kind of island office in Princeton with the top trader to get mentored. And I imagine you kind of as a monk, kind of just sitting there, like learning the trade.
Yep. And that's the first sign of how I recognized, wow, I view things in the world way different than the masses. And if you think about it, trading is all about probabilities, expected value. And when I was faced with the decision of, do I want to potentially take this opportunity in Princeton to learn from the top guy? For me, it was the clearest no-brainer I could have ever imagined. Forget the social life, forget living in the city. I'll always have time to live in New York City, have fun, do whatever. All I cared about was finding success at this job. I didn't need to become the best. I didn't need to make a ton of money. I just wanted to be able to make a living at this job that I really was passionate and loved at the time. And I would have done anything that was going to increase my probability of success and that expected value. And so many people, their priority wasn't surviving at the job. Their priority was, okay, I want to hopefully make it at the job, but I also want to have fun and be with my friends in the city. And for me, it was like, I'm willing to short-term sacrifice. It's like that whole marshmallow test where there was that study done, I think it's at Stanford, where they judged kids on their ability to delay gratification and not choose the marshmallow if they could have more later. Yeah. And a lot of those studies kind of showed that delayed gratification often leads to better long-term success. And that was the first example where I conceptually understood that. And it's like, if this is going to help my odds, this is what I need to prioritize, and there will be time for fun.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing that you were able to see that clearly and have that kind of foresight at such a young age, and then kind of align it with that, clearly that passion, and be in a spot that seems to have been perfectly designed for you, right? Because you went through hell, like the Navy SEALs Hell Week, and you didn't ring the bell. Yep.
And it's one of those cliches where, by definition, anyone that succeeds simply hasn't quit. But then it's weird because you end up in this thing where some people rightfully should quit. Like if it's not so much are you seeing P&L, it's are you seeing some form of progress? Are you at least doing something right that a couple months ago you weren't doing right or you weren't understanding? That's more important. So I ended up managing an office, and I've trained dozens and dozens of people at this point. And so many people concern themselves with the P&L, especially early on. And so much of what we try to teach is forget about the P&L. Just focus on the fact, are you getting better over time? And that's how we judge you. Not by your P&L the first couple of years, but are you improving? Are you understanding the concepts? And can I see you course correcting stuff that we give feedback on?
Yeah. That makes sense. Because I guess to your point, P&L could be random. It could be luck, right? It could be the large numbers. All right.
It's also not that predictive, oddly enough, because by assuming that it's predictive, my P&L was awful early on. I didn't have any P&L. And even 2 years in, I was one of the last people in my class to hit what's called a $100,000 milestone in net P&L. Nevertheless, I went on to be the best. And that's not that rare of a pattern. We've seen some people that get it very quick, they do find success. But a lot of people that get it very quick, it really doesn't correlate to career P&L as strongly as you would think.
Interesting. Okay, so you had that first, call it 12 to 24 months of struggle. You finally figured it out. Talk about that next phase of your career.
I would actually argue that next phase is the most exciting part of trading because you're putting effort in and you so tangibly see the output. Your P&L in that stage, kind of that second phase, it's not so determined by how good the market is. Obviously, the market will always have a role. A good market's going to help you. A bad market's going to hurt you. But you're ultimately going to be the biggest factor. Later on, when you're at a very elite level, if in a great market, you can just shoot the lights out. In a bad market, you can't really overcome that when you're very advanced. So what's so cool is you start to go from saying things like, oh man, like if I just put up this P&L every month, like I can finally afford my rent. Then you start to say a couple months later, oh man, like if I just had a 10K month, if I do this over the course of the year, I can make $100,000 this year. And you start to see so much growth. And the beauty of it is you're able to scale very, very quickly. And the speed at which I went from making 10K months to then making 100K months was staggering.
Why is that? You just add extra capital to it?
Part is capital, but then I think the big thing is most people have these limiting beliefs. And I think one of my strengths was I was very hyper rational about a lot of things. And maybe it was even a precursor, that decision to go to Princeton, where I was just trying to think like, what's the right decision? Let me remove emotional biases. And so often people have a lot of trouble increasing their size in trading. And even though it's just this number on the screen, when you're in that seat, it has such a real emotional and psychological effect. You feel the stress, you feel the adrenaline, you feel your heart beating. And
that's going to be one of the appeals of the job. You have to be a little bit of a adrenaline addict to be a good trader, I suspect. Am I right about that?
You definitely need to. It really is to some degree a performance sport. Not that it's so physical, but in the fact that you're making split-second real-time decisions and you're getting that emotional high and low, it very much is. You need to be someone that's okay in the arena under stress. You are performing every single day.
But the thing that manifests in your head manifests in your body eventually. Maybe we should spend a little bit of time talking about what your view was on how to kind of improve yourself from a psychological perspective to be able to withstand the difficult hours, the ups and downs, the stress of the job.
Yeah. And so now there's so much more information than there used to be. When I was first starting, which is probably not almost 15 years ago, we didn't have things that now seem obvious, like all the podcasts and information out there on the benefits of sleep, on the benefits of sunlight and getting outdoors, the benefits of fitness, nutrition, and even mindfulness. A lot of that just didn't exist. And so for me, I don't think I really had that many performance resources out there. It's kind of amazing what's so free and accessible nowadays in the podcast space. And back then, it was really me just trying to figure out how do I handle this stress? How do I focus on this? And as cliche as it is, I had a mentor that really guided me towards just focusing on the process. And look, you can control your inputs. You can't control the outputs. And as long as each day, essentially, I was figuring out on my own a lot of the tenets of Atomic Habits, in which I can only control my routine. What am I able to put into this each day? And then a lot of that, once you do that, it's easy to conceptually do that, but then reality is hard. When you have a really bad day trading, your whole identity is that P&L. Your whole identity is your performance, and it's stressful, and you see yourself failing and struggling. And it takes a certain type of person that struggles and then experiences that emotionally, but says, let me take these negative emotions and push it into something productive. And I would see so many people that would have bad days, and their response to that was, okay, I'm going to go off to happy hour. Or, okay, like, this is uncomfortable. These negative emotions are uncomfortable to me, and this feeling of failure is uncomfortable. So I'm going to leave the desk and leave the office for the day. And here's the thing. Early on, you're probably read 50 to 80% of days. You can easily be read 80% of days.
Really?
Yeah. No doubt about it.
So you're failing more often than you're succeeding.
With easily. Yeah.
Okay.
And guess what? If on all those days you start to cut your work ethic back, or if you start to quit early and if you start to leave early, that stuff compounds. All of a sudden, you're only getting 1 or 2 days a week of really good work. And so I think behaviorally, life will always have struggles. And I think the most important thing is, how do you respond to that? How do you take that discomfort or those negative emotions, that frustration, that anger? For me, it was, I never want to feel these emotions again. And the best way to do that is by putting in the work. And over time, you start to see that connect, and you start to see your negative day ratio, that percentage, go down. And then you use that feedback, those positive emotions, to also feed productivity, where you say, hey, this feels good. I finally outperformed a little bit. I finally had a good day. And you say, I know this came from putting in the hard work. So even on my good days, I'm not going to go out and party now, right? You'll get people where on the bad days they leave early or go to happy hour or whatever else. Then on the good days, they go out and celebrate. It leaves such a small sliver of time where they're really all in. And for me, I knew that all the performance is coming from the work. And so good or bad days, I want to be all in every day.
Yeah. I mean, for me, the discipline and being able to perform at a high level is its own price to some extent. And then when you have that fundamental level of process, if you have difficulty, you just know you're going to be able to reset the next day because you have something to fall back to. Yeah.
I think also the beauty of the job, and this also became interesting later as I started to track like health data and performance. It's very unique where you have a scorecard every single day. Unless you're a pro athlete, and not even pro athletes because you don't have a game every day, but to be able to see how you performed day in, day out and use that as signal for feedback. Most people don't get that type of daily feedback and something telling you, hey, you did good, you did no good. And it's just something so motivating to have that metric that you can push every single day. I'd assume if you're in a sales type job, or even for you, it's a lot of those metrics would be sexy and appealing to me, to almost gamify it, where how can I move all these in the right direction? And I think even with health stuff nowadays, a lot of that data is fun for many people because you can gamify it.
Yeah, you have something to benchmark yourself on. So you sent me and we talked about this, but you sent me a podcast where you interviewed, I think, the trading psychologist.
Trading psychologist, yeah.
Which was interesting because I didn't even realize that existed outside of Billions, right? So talk a little bit about that and when you brought them on and how that had an impact on your trading career.
Yep. So much like in Billions, there are trading psychologists, and a lot of these are psychologists that generally work with elite performers.
Yeah.
So they know the type of unique stressors you face. They know that, hey, if you have a good day, but everyone else did better, that is emotional stress. We play the comparison game. No matter who you are always comparing yourself to people around you. And in a field like sports or trading, you constantly have that scoreboard up there. You always know how you're doing, and that has its own psychological stressors and everything else. And so especially later on in the job, these ways that psychology pans out become very, very important to your performance. And something like how you manage going on tilt, how you manage FOMO, fear of missing out, how you manage the comparison game. And if I were to guess, the most stressful part of the job, especially long-term, once I reached a certain level of success where I knew I have a career, once I started to compete to be in the top 10 rankings within the firm, that's when you start really playing that comparison game. And that's a whole different level of stressor. And I would argue that's when you can really lose your love and passion for something, is when you start to do it not to see your own progress, because early on, all I cared about is my piece moving forward? Am I advancing? Then once you start looking all around you and wondering, oh, if I go on vacation, will I miss this? Or, oh man, I really botched this day. Everyone made X, I lost Y. That's when you add a whole nother layer of stressors and externalities. And that's where I really started to understand all those athletes and pro performers, what it must really be like on a grand stage out there.
Yeah, and you start maybe doing things for the wrong reason, right?
100%.
Where maybe you need to take some time off and you see somebody ahead of you and it kind of motivates you to stick around, but you needed that time off to de-stress.
Yep. And it's so funny because you might have your own strengths and your own skill sets, and it might not be a good market for your strengths and your skill sets, but you see other people performing, and that's when you start to leave your lane.
Yeah.
That's where you start to do things that you otherwise wouldn't want to do. So it really does, at that elite level, become so much a psychological battle, and knowing how can I perform the best of my abilities and stick in my lane? And how can I not let those factors get to me? How can I not let personal life distract too much? How can I really perform to the best of my ability every single day?
And I can see we're having somebody to talk to who's a professional and convey those feelings and have them be objective and say, hey, maybe you're doing this for the wrong reason. It could be so helpful. Like for myself, I have a daily meditation practice, and that allows me to kind of clear my mind and really figure out, am I doing things for the right reason? So, okay, so you had the first, kind of go back, you had that first stage of your career where you're struggling, trying to figure it out. You had that breakthrough. You have the second stage where you're finally kind of scaling your P&L, and it looks like you're about to have that third stage where you're a top performer.
Yep.
So talk about kind of a little bit more about how you got to number one.
Yeah. And if I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would just be the desire to improve every single day. And the focus on the process rather than what those around me were doing. And to my mentor's credit, he one time said to me, Lance, you need to stop worrying about and comparing yourself to everyone else in the firm, because given your potential, all of that is just thinking too small. Like one day, Lance, you will be playing a game so big where you're just going to be in a different league. And whether true or not, that makes you think. Like when you hear stuff like that from someone whose opinion you value, you start to think really big and remove even further limiting beliefs. And so for me, it was this combination of thinking, hey, I need to just play a totally separate game. I want to play the bigger game. Let them do their thing and keep on sticking in their ways, but I'm going to try and even just go bigger. Something that doesn't even exist within the firm at the time, and combine that by just focusing on how do I get better every single day? How do I relentlessly improve? And there's so many aspects of performance in trading that can just be, anything can be taken to the millionth drill down, right? And so you could start to become obsessed with sleep, which is one of the rabbit holes I went down, and say, okay, how can I track my sleep? How can I improve my sleep? What are all the best practices and habits I can take daily to make sure I'm getting the best sleep possible? Then, how can I take that sleep score and how well I slept and use that as an input for how much I'm risking each day? And so actually, I found during my career that the quality of my sleep was one of the biggest correlating factors in my daily P&L. And the truth is that's probably true for everyone, but most people don't have a daily scorecard where they can see that. Yeah. And so it was like, wow, this is really important for me day to day. So you can drill down really far to that. Then,
although you were joking, I know you did a whole sleep lab. You spent like thousands of dollars.
Oh yeah, I've
like every
exactly
minutia of your sleep,
because it's a job where that performance matters. You see the impact, and you also get compensated, and you're incentivized to optimize all those things. So I would be great.
Better than having a good night's sleep.
And that's also true. And just the reality is, even if it didn't make me more P&L, just psychologically and emotionally, you're so much more resilient to the stress of the job. You're healthier. So it would have been a no-brainer even if it wasn't for the P&L. And then you can start going down the rabbit hole of how do I extract out every little optimization from the software and my keyboard or my screen layout? How do I get every single news source that could be relevant? How do I optimize the office environment so that I have the most powerful team setting that I could have? and you just go through every single thing that matters, and you're just relentlessly refining. And you master this craft where it's some ask what makes a great trader. There's some commonalities and some things that are necessary, but the reality is it's a combination of a bunch of different skill sets, and you get them in different degrees. And so you're really refining all of these things. It's all these variables together that lead to greatness.
Yeah, it's the compounding effect, which I think is one thing that's interesting. The other thing that you mentioned that I think is really interesting, and I've experienced it in my own life, is kind of when you're going through these transitional phases, it's sometimes hard to see what the future looks like. But when you have really good mentors around you that have been there and see what the future looks like, and they can sit and tell you, this is where you're headed, it provides so much confidence in your abilities.
Yeah.
Right? It helps and provides some guidance. So I think that's really interesting. So curious, when you're going through this whole path, were there any times where you had like a big struggle psychologically, or a big losing day where you were questioning things?
I think for any trader that's found success, you never reach a point where you don't struggle.
Okay.
At no point, even at my peak, the job was never easy. And it's not really supposed to be, because it's a performance job. And so for any given year, maybe not some of my best years, but most years, I would probably have 2 to 3 months where I was in a P&L hole and I was making no money or losing money. And throughout my career, being more of a home run swinger, there would be times where I would just take massive losses, where literally in seconds or minutes, I would lose 3 or 4 months worth of P&L.
What's the biggest amount you ever lost on one trade?
The biggest I've ever lost on one trade, I think I lost like 2.3 million in probably about 15 minutes.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
How did you feel in that moment?
You feel some level of regret. You start to look, how do I, where's the undo button?
Okay.
You call up tech support and you're like, hey man, how do I get a mulligan on this one? And the answer is, as with all things in life, you don't get a mulligan. There's no undoing these things. And what's so interesting is with the big losses, you do actually go through the different stages of grief. Like, it really is very psychologically difficult to have these losses. And it's so much of your identity. It's so much of, plus, especially if you're providing for yourself or your family, it's also how you just support yourself.
Yeah.
And you don't know when you're going to get out of that hole. You hope you're going to get out of it. You never know for sure. And the only thing that helped me is the more you go through these experiences, the more data points you have where you say, hey, like, okay, I've gone through this before. I'm going to be okay. And I know this isn't pretty. I've gone through these emotions. First, I just need to accept what happened. I need to accept that there's no one doing it. As my mentor would say, you get 24 hours to sulk and complain and be upset. Mm-hmm. After that, it's just go time. You need to learn the lesson from it. Like, the most important thing to recognize long-term is if you're going to be a good trader, every single loss you take, that's a lesson. And you can be so upset, oh my God, I lost X amount of dollars in this. But eventually you learn to say, look, I'm going to learn the lesson I need to learn from this. I can be upset about the money lost, but on a long enough time frame, fixing this lesson is going to make me so much more money. I'm going to fix this vulnerability. I'm going to fix and optimize my system to correct for this. And then in the long run, I'm so much safer and better off. And so you really need to take not just the loss, but what's that doing to my expected value over time? And so I developed this concept called the bobblehead concept, where you focus on, look, not what's my P&L, but what's my expected value over time. And so if you take a big loss, but you learn from it, your expected value over time actually increased. You get better as a result of that loss. And once you start to reframe problems that way, that's when you get so much more resilient. And it's a lot of those, I wouldn't call it like a mental game, but it's a lot of those mental frameworks that I used to help me get through those tough times.
Yeah. It's a lot about resiliency and really reframing that every obstacle is just another opportunity.
Yep.
The obstacle is the way.
Yep.
Right. Okay, so I think I met you, I was introduced to you sometime in 2020, right around COVID. And I remember that's when you put on one of your biggest trades ever and most successful trades. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, so there were 2020 and early 2021 both had by far some of the biggest trades of my career. And in fact, early 21, I think, were some of the the best streaks I ever went on. Like I was having months that would have been really good years, and I was having days that would have been okay years. Okay. And a lot of that, funnily enough, a lot of that came from GME, GameStop, and AMC, which are actually back in play over the last couple months and continue. I say online that these tickers have been the greatest trading tickers of all time. And if they weren't already before, after the last couple months, there's just no doubt about it.
Well, I want to say that to the audience that a couple of weeks ago you were supposed to be on this show, and it was was it Hello Kitty?
Yeah, Roaring Kitty came back after a couple year hiatus.
Lance calls me, he's like, we got to reschedule.
Yeah, I'm like, I'm sorry, man, but stuff's going crazy. It's going to be a big one today.
I understand. Okay, so go through that a little bit.
Yep. So essentially, if you're a good day trader, and I think most professional day traders, not everyone, right? Everybody has their own little strategy, their own little strengths and weaknesses. But I think most trading firms and most traders gravitate to what we call in-play stocks, essentially stocks with fresh news, stocks making the biggest, craziest moves. We want to see big, crazy moves. We want to see emotions. We want to see psychology. We want to see euphoria. We want to see panic. And GameStop is essentially the perfect trading arena for all of this, because you get a lot of unsophisticated, uninformed investors. People YOLO, people have dreams, stuff, all people get caught off sides. And so even back in January 21, the stock was making really, really huge moves. The ranges on this thing were incredible. And so what would happen is you would get these euphoric trends that would go up. You would wait to short the turn. Once the stock turned, the stock would just catch momentum, and everybody on the other side would then start panicking. Imagine just like a big pendulum just shifting back and forth. So you would try and use your system of technical analysis, which is just simply using the chart and interpreting the chart for entries and exits. And you would try and find where that momentum shifts after a really euphoric move, where the pendulum gets so pulled one direction. You would get it as it shifts back. And then because there's just so much emotions and so much money flowing back and forth, the pendulum would go all the way the other side. So you would be shorting huge size. The stock would drop 20, 30, 40, 50% in like a 30-minute span, an hour span. And then you would end up flipping, not just covering your short, but you would be getting long and buying and catching that bounce back towards an equilibrium. So just massive moves in volatility.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine you in that position because you've seen that trend, you've studied that trend so many times, and you're in that moment and you know what's going to happen to some extent. I feel like
those years were just the Super Bowl for day traders.
Yeah.
And you were just getting so many reps and so many good hands. It's like sitting down at a poker table where all you're getting is just cards that are like 10 or jack and above. And that's the thing though, is like, that being said, no trade is ever certain. There's always doubt. You might be very confident, much like with a poker hand. Yeah. But unlike in poker, where you can have a royal flush or you can have the best hand on the board, you never know that it's 100% certain, like with poker. And so you always still need to be open-minded. You always still need to be flexible, and you still need a system that protects you when you're wrong. There was one time where GDX, which is an ETF that holds a basket of gold miners, and for those in the trading world, everyone knows that in general, ETFs trade at exactly their net asset value. Unlike a closed-end fund that can trade away from net asset value, these generally trade 100% in line. If there was any divergence, it would be arbitraged away.
Yeah. What
we saw though in I believe it was March of 2020 when it was peak COVID fears, those ETFs, which normally never even diverge by a couple pennies, GDX and GDXJ, which is the gold miner junior ETF, these had diverged from net asset value by like 10, 15% or more, it is just absurd, probably never seen in modern
that's
trading.
Like printing money.
Yeah.
To some extent,
well, it's printing
trades.
money, but then the craziest part is what happens when you put on that trade, but then the next morning it blows out even more.
Okay.
And so that's where things get really tricky and dangerous.
Interesting. Okay, so you went through this like bonanza period. One thing we talked about is you left trading full time at some point in that period, and we talked about kind of like you started to look at money differently because at one point P&L was a reflection of you, and I think you wanted to have a different view from that perspective. So talk about that transition, about leaving something that you were the best at such an early age.
Yep. And I think a lot of things in life end up timing. And if anything, being a professional trader makes you really attuned to timing and cycles and changes. And in that moment, I recognized that I just went through a year and a half of the Super Bowl of trading. And right now, so far in 2024, trading's been very good. It's probably been a 7 out of 10.
Okay.
But though that year and a half was like an 11 out of 10. And I knew this stuff tends to, it's hot, then things calm down. And I knew there's probably quieter years ahead with near certainty. And to have done what I did, I achieved everything I could have imagined. I was the top trader in the firm. I set some all-time records. It was at a point where, like, as far as accomplishment in that space, I knew that I had done everything I could have imagined. So simultaneously, while that was happening, my own personal values were also changing. A couple years prior, I had started doing some philanthropy work and started my own nonprofit that was helping students tackle different social issues. My priorities on health and sleep and overall wellness were becoming more and more important. And as you can imagine, working 50, 60, 70 hours sedentary in a seat with very poor sleep when you have overnight positions and risk, and really 10 plus years of trading, it built this habit where I was never really getting deep sleep. And the second I had any level of consciousness, I was checking the market. Did anything happen with my positions? Did anything happen that I need to be aware of? And so that sleep pattern ends up being very bad. And along with being hit with all that adrenaline and cortisol all day, when you're normally biologically hit with those things, it's normally because fight or flight. And you're supposed to either be running away or you need to be fighting, you need to be doing something. And so it's particularly bad when you're just internalizing that and you're not walking at all and you're so hyper sedentary. And there are ways to find balance and to improve those things and find the middle ground where it's okay, no matter what, I'm still going to go out for lunch. I'm going to take a walk in the morning or the afternoon. But for me, it was one of those things where it's like, if I don't at some point allow myself to move on, I don't know what else I can be great at. And I don't allow myself the opportunity to find the new passion and the new mountain to climb.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really cool because I suspect a lot of people, whether it's any career that become masters of their craft, kind of stick with it even past their heyday. And you being able to kind of, not to say that you're past your heyday at all, you're still, 35, 34?
Yeah.
You're still young. But being able to move away from it and try to like pursue other interests is really cool. Especially philanthropy, the stuff you're doing there is pretty awesome. I've seen some of that. But now it looks like you're also pursuing and trying to build out a business in the trading space and providing broad education to the community.
Yep. So I think one big thing, and so many people are like, oh, you only feel this way because you had some level of success or this or that. But I just don't feel that's true. But what it is I've always had a philosophy that the world works best when you take care of your own needs, then you also take and help each other. And so much of my focus now is on community and how can we all help build a better place for everyone. So I try to do my part in learning about different social issues. I started a nonprofit that does these competitions at different universities to address social issues and kind of gets other people to help compound positive change. But then also, since then, I still recognize that most of my expertise is in stock trading. And I've started to build an online audience where I'm openly sharing my trading knowledge. And one of the big projects I had for 2024, really my number one priority, has been to build the greatest free trading course ever created.
Okay.
And to really teach other people out there how to think and to pay it forward and to teach them processes that will hopefully help them find success. So then in whatever way that's right for them, they also then pay it forward to others. And the nice part that's been really cool is as I've built this audience, so many people have found success. And then so many people have had their worldview change where the amount of times I've seen someone comment and say, thank you so much for what you do. I've been successful as a result of this. And now I'm paying it forward in my own ways. That really gives me a lot of fulfillment and pride to see.
Yeah, I suspect as much as making money sometimes.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, like everyone needs money. Money's important, and nobody ever wants to believe this either, but But beyond having most of your needs covered, the really important things in life, health, relationships, fulfillment, it tends to not really be about that. And I think if anything, most people in the finance world, like both of us, live in that world, and so many people have that scoreboard. And I'd say that's actually, I think, the biggest weakness of people in our space is it's such an objective scoreboard. It's such a social status, identity-based scoreboard where so many people in our world measure themselves by that, when I don't think that's really what ends up giving you long-term satisfaction and happiness. And the amount of successful people I've known that have been depressed, like, I think most people won't ever believe that, but it's like, look, how much success and achievement do people like Avicii, Robin Williams, Anthony Bourdain, and it's like, wait a second, like, if that's true, then maybe the framework and the assumptions we make are off. And I'd argue it ends up going back to health, community, relationships. That's where you find the real happiness.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to have these types of conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So as you kind of look towards the future, is there anything else you want to comment on from a trading world perspective, what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think some of the things that interest me most now tend to be very health and wellness based. And I think the whole world is kind of touched upon, whether it's Peter Attia's podcast or Huberman or Brian Johnson of online fame now.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the world is making this push for how can I be healthier? How can I be happier? And the data on even alcohol trends are shifting so much. And if you're coming from a state school like I went to, and then the trading world where alcohol use is just rampant, it's this big shift now that so much of this world is trying to say, wait a second, this isn't necessarily in my best interest if it's beyond moderation.
Yeah, I wonder how long it'll take to have that shift, because I suspect a lot of people still have that mindset, but it sounds like it's heading in the right direction. Yeah,
and I think even for both of us, like with our interests and hobbies, the two of us, I know we both track our sleep. We have a lot of friends in the health space, and a lot of that interests me. And even though I don't know where some of that passion and interest will go in the future, it's still one of those things where it's like I'd love to pursue more of it, and I don't think you always need to know where the end path is, but you just kind of pull on some threads that appeal to you.
Yeah, just follow the journey, right? Enjoy that while it lasts.
It's part of the journey.
Absolutely. Well, I know you're a foodie. We're going to grab some lunch so you can tell me where to go on that journey. But it was good having you on.
Absolutely. Thank you for the great questions, Ilya. Thank you for the friendship and the advisorship.
Absolutely.